Good morning again. My name is Joanne Keane and I'm the CEO of LIA, and I'm delighted to be joined here this morning by Registrar of Credit Unions, Elaine Byrne, and CEO of CUMA, Lisa Stapleton. So good morning to you both, and thank you so much for being with us. We're delighted to host this webinar this morning, and in collaboration with CUMA, of course. And the purpose of it is to provide clarity and answer some of the key questions that you have been asking following the announcement of the minimum competency for credit unions. The inclusion of credit unions within the scope of MCC represents a significant shift in how credit unions across Ireland will operate, emphasising the importance of competency in financial advice and product selling. And we understand that this shift may bring feelings of apprehension or concern, but we aim to alleviate those feelings throughout this webinar. We won't have all the answers, but where we don't have the answers, we'll seek to find the answer and we will get back to you all. In terms of LIA, many of you will be familiar with us, but those of you who aren't, we've been supporting credit unions for over 15 years, and we're delighted to advise that almost 3,000 of our members come from the credit union movement as of today. Among those members, more than 30% have achieved the QFA designation and 25% have earned the APA loans designation. And this indicates how many have been proactive in obtaining existing designations long before minimum competency came in, and which can only be, of course, to the benefit of your customers. So, I mean, at the start, for what I would say is many of you are already well on the way to achieving competency if you haven't already achieved it. So panic not. Hopefully this session now will alleviate any concerns or give you guidance on next steps. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa, who's going to, the format of this is fairly informal. Lisa and Elaine, there's going to be a Q&A question and answer session, and we'll take it from there. And if you have any questions, Lisa will be saying this as well, feel free to put them in. So Lisa, over to you.
Thanks very much, Joanne, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to participate in this morning's panel discussion, which is tailored to address the questions and concerns you may have regarding your minimum competency code requirements. We will delve into some of the pressing issues and offer guidance to ensure a thorough understanding of the minimum competency code requirements. This discussion, I suppose, is a unique opportunity to gain clarity and valuable knowledge and empower you and your credit unions with the information that you need to navigate the requirements effectively and equip yourself to excel in your role. We do look forward to your participation and meaningful engagement this morning. We have put together a list of some of the key questions that you, our audience, have been asking, but we also invite you, as Joanne said, to pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen throughout this morning's session. We do have a lot to get through, and we will dedicate time at the end of the webinar to answer as many of those questions as we can. For those that we don't get to, and indeed all the questions from this morning's session will be circulated in an FAQ document post this webinar. So look, without further ado, Elaine, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. Just to start off, could you elaborate on the primary motivation expanding the scope of the minimum competency code to include credit unions?
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Joanne, and good morning to everyone that has joined. I can see from the numbers that over 340 at this stage, it obviously is a very topical issue. And I'm really pleased to be able to participate in this panel discussion, which LIA has kindly hosted, and to answer a range of questions as best I can. At the outset, I will say, and I'm sure many of you have observed this already as well, that there is quite a bit of technical aspects to this, and there are many more here in the central bank that are familiar with that detail in terms of having been involved with MCC over a number of years in terms of drafting regulations and material. So as Lisa mentioned, in terms of questions later on, certainly if there are any in that category that are in the more technical space or I don't have the answer, I'm very happy to take away, consult with those here in the bank who have the expertise and link back with the LIA for the FAQ that Lisa mentioned. Also, indeed, more broadly, if you have questions even after today, please feel free to send them to the central bank. We have a specific email address. We'll give you details of that again, but very simply, it's competency@centralbank.ie. So that is always there for you as well. Just before I get into that, the specific question that Lisa raised there in terms of our primary motivations in terms of extending MCC to core business of credit unions, I want to say that we very much recognise that there are a lot of qualifications already held by staff across the credit union sector. Indeed from LIA and other bodies. And I think that is a real testament to the interest and commitment of credit union staff to ongoing learning, upskilling and being familiar with new developments. Doing a qualification while working is very challenging. I'm sure many of us have been through that experience at some point or other, and it really does require a big commitment. But it's also a positive experience, particularly when you're on the other side of it and you can look back and see what you've got from it, including the learning of new things. Indeed, often reconfirming some things that you know, and also making contacts with others on the same course and journey as yourself. So I think that gives a little bit of context, and sometimes maybe we just need to remind ourselves of that. So those are all positives. So as you know, with effect from the 1st of October, the Minimum Competency Code, MCC, and Minimum Competency Regulations, MCR, will apply to credit unions and cover in-scope activities. These changes are being introduced at this time with a view to ensuring that credit union members are afforded the same level of protection as consumers availing of similar products and services from other regulated entities in terms of minimum knowledge and competence standards. The standards were developed following consultation with the sector, and they are designed to enhance the skill set of credit union staff. Acknowledging the important role the credit unions play both in Irish society generally and more specifically the financial sector, it is expected that the expansion of the scope of the MCC to credit union core services can bring benefits in terms of further strengthening the quality of the service provided to your members as consumers of financial services, therefore reinforcing member confidence in the sector. It is expected that this will also serve to further the level of expertise across the credit union sector, and in turn that can support the future development of credit union business models. So I'd say that is really the overall broad context, Lisa.
Great, Elaine. Yeah, and I suppose the outset, CUMA, along with others, participated in the consultation on the development of the standards, and in line with the extensive consultation with the sector at the time. And I suppose, we did note the high level of qualifications in existence already in the sector, and these standards will build upon the already high level of training and expertise in credit unions. And like you said, it'll also support the development of credit unions business models. So it's very welcome indeed. You mentioned October, Elaine. So summarising the minimum competency requirements for credit unions, and just for clarification purposes for the participants this morning, you might confirm if everything has to be done for the 1st of October.
You're just on mute there, Elaine.
Thanks,
No
Joanne. So currently, as people know, the MCC applies to credit union staff exercising a controlled function in limited circumstances, i.e. more particularly as a retail intermediary, or providing mortgage credit agreements, or devising or providing mortgage credit products. With effect from the 1st of October of this year, the MCC will apply to credit union staff and volunteers who are exercising a controlled function, the exercise of which includes one of the activities listed in sections 1.2 or 2.1 of the MCC. So this will include activities such as arranging retail financial products and providing advice on retail financial products, by way of example. The MCC applies to persons undertaking the controlled functions that are within the scope of the MCC. The MCR the MCR sets out the requirements for credit unions to ensure that persons performing relevant control functions on its behalf comply with the standards set out in the MCC. So, on the timelines provided, credit unions have been afforded a 12-month lead-in to ensure readiness for this expansion of the MCC to credit union activities. And what that means is that from the 1st of October of this year, all credit unions will have an additional 6 controlled functions that will apply for all activities conducted by a credit union which are within the scope of MCC. So these are functions that are designated from CUCF 3 to CUCF 8. But more specifically, I'll give 2 examples. CUCF3 is giving advice to a member when providing a financial service, and CUCF4 arranging or offering to arrange a financial service. Just by way of background, in terms of what I mentioned, the existing MCC applying to the intermediary business, that comprises 11 CFs. So in addition to what I've mentioned about the October 2024 deadline, a 4-year transition period will apply for persons undertaking the roles outlined to become compliant with the MCC requirements. So what this means is that where a person is undertaking one of those 6 customer-facing controlled functions on the 1st of October of this year, that person may continue to perform the controlled function on what is termed a deemed qualified basis until the 1st of October 2028, subject to certain conditions, and in particular, that the person must be working towards a relevant recognised qualification. So accordingly, credit union staff currently undertaking in-scope activities can avail of these transitional arrangements to comply with the MCC and to obtain the relevant qualifications where not already held. So I hope that gives a bit of a snapshot of timelines and transitions.
Great, Elaine. Yeah, that's very clear. Thank you. And just another question that was submitted in relation to the operational tasks that would fall within the scope of minimum competency that may not have done so previously. Could you just comment on some of those operational tasks?
Okay, Lisa. So I think the point to note here is that firstly, the MCC applies to persons when undertaking specific activities relating to financial products and services. So credit unions themselves will be required to determine whether or not an activity falls within the scope of the MCC, but to guide them in that, they'll need to ascertain whether a person is exercising a controlled function on its behalf and carrying out an activity listed in section 1.2 or 2.1 of the MCC. So, for example, if the activity involves the provision or advice of information in relation to consumers or members, indeed, on retail financial products, arranging or offering to arrange retail financial products for members, assisting in determining the outcome of an insurance claim, directly managing staff in these roles, adjudicating on a complaint in relation to provision of financial service, and being directly involved in design of a retail financial product. Those are some of the examples. Staff, in summary, staff then undertaking any a controlled function which includes the exercise of any of those type of activities listed in the MCC must hold a qualification recognised for that function.
Okay, great, Elaine. And I suppose, look, in light of today is a big day, I suppose, in terms of the milestone for the partial commencement of the new Credit Union Amendment Act. With the backdrop of that, can you explain the steps credit unions must take to ensure that all individuals, including volunteers, employees and directors, meet the minimum competency requirements by the 1st of October deadline?
Yes, Lisa, and you did mention the Credit Union Amendment Act and commencement thereof, and I might say a few words about that later on under one of the other topics. In terms of the steps to be taken, the general requirements applying to credit unions are set out in Part 2 of the MCR. I would say that the overarching requirement is that credit unions must ensure that a person subject to the MCC performing a relevant function on its behalf complies with the standards set out in the MCC. Part 5 of the MCR sets out the obligation on credit unions to conduct an internal annual review of the qualifications held by individuals to ensure that the qualification held is appropriate to that role and that the development and experience needs of an individual take into account regulatory development and our new product offerings. And credit unions must also ensure that individuals themselves are familiar with any internal policies and processes designed to ensure the individual's compliance with regulatory requirements. Part 5 of the MCR also sets out requirements in respect of processes and procedural requirements to ensure that employees are compliant with CPD requirements. And I was just looking into this. I see a requirement of 15 hours for CPD requirements. I'm just looking for some clarification on when that applies from. Obviously, for some people, they obviously have until 2028 to get their actual requirement.
I'd imagine though, Elaine, it'll be in line with the previous MCC, where once they're qualified, they have to do the hours, but while they're achieving it, I'd imagine it'll probably end up being the same.
I think that
but to get clarification,
just to clarify that, yes. So in addition, credit unions will remain responsible for identifying the roles in a credit union that now fall within the remit of the new customer-facing 6 control functions that apply from the 1st of October. So accordingly, credit unions need to ascertain whether a person is exercising a control function on its behalf and is carrying out an activity listed in section 1.2 or 2.1 of the MCC. There is an up-to-date list on our website, Central Bank website, in terms of qualifications, and that includes an addendum published on the MCC on some additional qualifications that are going to be covered and recognised from the 1st of October 2024. Joanne might know just a bit more about that, or our qualifications more generally, but I understand the purpose of that was to make that known now so that people can be in a position to plan and see the options available to them. So I don't know if Joanne wants to.
So I suppose, Elaine, in respect of that, there's obviously a number of qualifications that are already in existence, and those who have achieved the QFA, for example, are covered, and they just need to continue doing their CPD as they would have always done. Those who are not aspiring to achieve the full QFA should be concentrating on getting loans and the savings and investment qualifications. I see a question in there just in relation to CUA, and I appreciate that comment that there's much more in savings and investments than the credit union will actually need. That point was made at the time of consultation, and that maybe the CUA would be considered in that regard, but that didn't happen. Now, LIA are looking at whether or not we should or should not top up the CUA in terms of additional support to bring that to pass and to see could we get it then in as a recognised qualification. But no decision has been made on that. The other thing is obviously the Irish League of Credit Unions. You will have seen there, as Elaine referred to, that their qualifications pathways and ACUP will be recognised on the 1st of October, but that's for people who have obtained it in the past, they got it approved retrospectively. My understanding is that it'll need to be the level 7 qualification, but I could be wrong on that. But generally, all minimum competency qualifications need to be at level 7. So therefore, anyone who's holding those designations with the league and currently have are keeping up to date, I assume, with CPD, will be able to use those from the 1st of October. Our understanding is, though, that they don't exist into the future in terms of, if you're studying now or you haven't undertaken any study, that you can't begin those programs, but if you hold them retrospectively. But in terms of, say, I suppose, our members who are on the call today, if you have loans or you have savings investments, depending, you probably need both. But if you have the QFA, you're covered. And we're still undecided yet on the demand for the CUA and whether we should do something on that. And just while I'm on it, in terms of additional exams and things like that, I saw a question on that, just to cover that off. I appreciate that the IOB do additional exams offerings. We probably don't anticipate the need to do that. What we tend to do is, if there's a demand from a credit union with large enough numbers, we will hold a separate sitting for that credit union, and we're very happy to always talk to the credit union in question. So we could do it at a time that would suit the credit union rather than en masse exams. So very happy to talk to a credit union in that regard. And just to bear in mind as well that you need to be working towards it. You don't need to be fully qualified by the 1st of October. So there isn't that sense of panic either.
Yeah.
So, okay. Sorry, Lisa, very long-winded, Elaine. Sorry.
Thanks, Joanne. I suppose just my next question really is around the main challenges, and I'm just conscious of some of the questions in the Q&A box there. We might take some of these in under this heading. So, the main challenges credit unions might face in complying with the minimum competency requirements. One of the questions there's a query regarding MCC for volunteer directors. So some volunteers, being solicitors, accountants, various, professional backgrounds, do they need to be MCC'd too? Someone has commented there's a serious risk of losing volunteers for governance. In relation to language barriers, staff members who may be struggling with exams, as English may not be their first language. Is there any plans to have exams in any other languages? And staff that may have a learning disability, and that may struggle to pass an exam to achieve minimum competency, what options are available in that regard? So kind of 3 varied challenges there, but I suppose just to get some comments on how you feel about those.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I have some very good observations and questions there. In terms of challenges, firstly, we noted that some respondents, indeed, to the consultation to CP 147 on this, raised concerns with regard to the extension of MCC and MCR to credit union core services, but with coming at it from that point of the impact on volunteers in the sector. Now, the MCC applies to persons when undertaking specific activities relating to financial products and services, rather than to the titles or roles held by those persons. So while we acknowledge obviously this key role that volunteers play in the sector, this needs to be balanced against the need for members to receive the same level of protection and quality of advice, regardless of the regulated entity, who that is, and indeed the status or title of the persons in the regulated entity that are dealing with this. So in, I suppose, summary and simple term on this one, it really is, if a person is within the scope of the MCC standards, they should be appropriately qualified, regardless of whether they are a volunteer or an employee. Yeah. So perhaps on that then, credit unions may need to have a look at volunteer activities and see, one way is obviously the qualification route, but then there's obviously other things to consider in terms of the roles for volunteers. Can they be notwithstanding getting involved in this level? So
potentially, Elaine, would you maybe kind of have people who are currently volunteers, perhaps they could stay on, but they mightn't be doing roles that they were currently doing?
Yeah,
if
exactly.
they didn't want to be compliant.
Yes, and indeed, more broadly, I would say, as a board member, and I'm basing this on not just credit unions, really, I would think board members probably don't need to and probably shouldn't really be getting involved in this level of operation, very much in terms of the governance function that a board exercises is at that broader level. And then, they're going to be reliant on executive and staff for exercising day-to-day functions. So so certainly if it's a volunteer at board level, I'd say that's kind of quite relevant. And there is actually so many functions and activities that as a board member that you have within your remit that
outside of
I
scope,
think
like you feel.
yes,
Yeah.
so it's um I've a couple of other things to say, but I also know those are two very interesting points mentioned in terms of the first language and learning disability. Now, I don't have anything specific on those. Now, I don't whether Joanne, I don't know if
Well, I
it's
suppose,
something
what
that's
we
come up before in any of your
Yeah,
other
I mean, we would
functions.
have that all the time, and I mean, I suppose it's not unique to the credit union movement
Yeah,
that people across
yeah,
financial services have people working with them,
Yeah.
disabilities or learning
yeah,
difficulties, who are in a function that they need to undertake MCC exams. But we're very happy to work with those individuals in terms of special accommodations, be it extra time, maybe somebody reading out the exam paper for them, somebody needing to type or answer, so the main thing is that they touch base with us and we can see, and often we've had people who have used a dictionary if the English isn't their first language, but again, it needs to be approved in advance. Like people can't rock up to the exam and say, listen, I have a problem, and likewise, if they have a learning disability or they have a challenge or they're dyslexic, whatever it might be, there's all sorts of supports that are available there to help. So just reach out to, us in education, in LIA, and we'll support you in that regard.
yeah.
There shouldn't be
That's
a
very
barrier though within
yeah.
reason. We should be able to assist so that you can get them through. And even if it means a bit of additional support in terms of tutoring, we're happy to look at that as well for them.
Yeah, no, that's very useful. And certainly if there's anything coming through on this at any stage that you want to talk to
Yeah.
ourselves about, or even just to update us on what's happening there. The other point that I was just going to make under this broad area in terms of challenges, clearly, it's incumbent on all credit unions to assess the level of qualifications that will be required on foot of the new controlled functions. And a framework or approach for doing so is probably for credit unions to, in the first place, assess the level of qualifications currently held by staff and volunteers who fall within the scope of the MCC. And then where gaps are identified in the level of qualification held, credit unions should start to engage with the staff and or volunteers with a view to planning how these gaps will be closed over the 4-year transition period. Also, a point to note is when hiring new staff into roles now with activities that will fall within the scope of the MCC, credit unions should consider the existing qualifications held by those persons and noting that those new entrants starting will an MCC activity over the coming 4-year period will also be required to comply with the new entrant requirements as set out in section 1.4 of the MCC. So accordingly, credit unions will need to ensure they plan and have oversight of their staff and volunteer qualifications to ensure the compliance by that 1st of October 28 date. Notwithstanding examples of the challenges, though, and as I suppose I referred to at the outset, we believe the new requirements should help to ensure the similar level of protection for members of credit unions compared to consumers of other financial entities, and that for credit unions themselves, they will see a benefit as well, indeed, in contributing to further member confidence and indeed underpinning evolution in their credit union business models. So that's hopefully addresses some of those points, Lisa.
Great, Elaine. Just on the off chance you might have a figure to hand, just I suppose it came in by way of a question, and I was just curious. Okay, we've detailed the percentage of qualifications held by staff in the sector. What's roughly the percentage of volunteer officers in compliance with MCC currently? Like what's the
I don't have that
rate?
figure off the top of my head, and to be honest with you, the credit unions don't with us specify who the
Yeah,
individuals are. But you know, I know we had a very good take up, let's say, but unfortunately it's for the governance roles which aren't recognised. You know, we'd great take up in that. But I don't have that figure to hand, unfortunately. But we did have a lot, like, I think it depends, you know, and again, understandably so, the bigger credit unions could get under that and start getting them qualified. But that's perhaps, I don't know, an easier task for them. They have the resources to be putting them through rather than the smaller credit unions, maybe. But we did have quite a number of directors doing the exams. But you know, just in terms of in terms of that, again, just to reiterate, in terms of the qualification, so APA loans and APA savings and investments of what you need. If you don't have if you have QFA, you're covered. CUA, you're not covered, but you have done the regulation exam. So therefore, you just need to add on loans and savings and investments, but we are still considering whether we get an amendment to the CUA and get it approved retrospectively. So just there's a number of questions on that. So hopefully that covers that. Yeah.
Look, and I'm just conscious there's questions flooding in here at a ferocious rate. So
yeah,
obviously the FAQ document will be very beneficial to everybody just to clarify a lot of the governance questions coming in around board members and what actually satisfies the requirements, what doesn't. So if we, as I said at the outset, if we don't get to all of these questions, they will be answered. Okay, just moving on. Elaine, just with emphasis on ensuring staff competency, I suppose what recommendations can you offer to credit unions for developing and maintaining robust training programs that align with the standards? You know, they're obviously, you know, reviewing their training and qualification needs at this point and setting about training plans. So have you any comment on that?
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So I suppose for individual credit unions will have different knowledge and competence requirements reflecting their own business models, which will mean that staff training will need to focus on the areas most relevant to the products and services offered to their members. One of the areas which may require some attention, I think, is indeed maintenance of robust records, because it will be really important for credit unions to be able to demonstrate compliance with the MCR, and also for credit union staff to, among other things, demonstrate that they hold the relevant professional qualifications and indeed facilitate their mobility across roles. In terms of there's I suppose the training programs, there's obviously a good bit of choice out there. Joanne has referred to LIA programs, and there are others. I think it would be important really for credit unions to to have someone that is engaging in this and is having the conversations with the likes of Joanne and her team and with the other institutions to see and understand what is involved in the different programs, what is the course content, and then see there might be some that suit their staff and their needs better than others. So I think having those conversations and actually really being familiar at credit union level about what is involved, and indeed what is the likely demand on the individuals in the credit union in terms of the time they'll need, and how that interacts with their work. And indeed, I think Joanne made reference to what sounds very useful for for certain credit unions of size or whatever, having maybe a tailored timelines and timetable, that kind of thing. So I think I would really say, stepping back from all of this, the message would be like stand back from it, have a look at what you really need also for your business and take account of the staff and our volunteers, if there are ones that want to be involved in this, so that you can kind of tailor it to your credit union, because then you'll get a lot more out of it.
Just to clarify, after coming in, people are finding it difficult to find the link to the recognised qualifications. We'll send the links to the relevant areas on the site with the FAQ document as well.
I'm not sure if there's low bandwidth at my end, or
Yeah, so we can certainly put that into the link. We can put it into the FAQ. So the link is under if you Google central bank under minimum competency, you know, the qualifications document is there.
I'm not sure I'm experiencing some low bandwidth here, but I heard the point, and certainly what we can do as part of this exercise is give the link, give a direct link that will bring you in more easily to that. So that's the one on the qualifications. We can do that.
Great.
A takeaway.
Thanks, Elaine. Just conscious of time and want to get to as many questions as we can as possible. Elaine, I suppose just the central bank's supervisory, I suppose, expectations, and how will the central bank supervise compliance with the requirements going forward, and what support mechanisms are in place for credit unions striving to meet these standards going forward?
Okay, and yes, a very pertinent question. And I would say, so in the first place, the MCR obviously places the requirements on credit unions to ensure their staff are compliant with the MCC. And our first expectation is we expect credit unions to undertake regular reviews of the MCR to ensure compliance, and where any issues are identified, that they address those as a matter of urgency. So I suppose this part goes back to our earlier questions as well. Very much the credit union, to be in control of this, have documentation, evidence of how it has gone about planning and tracking qualifications and so on. So that's all in the space of the credit union. The central bank uses a number of methods to monitor compliance with requirements such as this. And as with the other codes and regulatory requirements that we have, we may undertake inspections to check compliance with the MCC. More broadly, we apply a risk-based approach to conduct supervision aligned with our own strategy. So this may include firm-specific or indeed themed inspections across a range of credit unions to confirm compliance with certain regulatory requirements, assess the governance structures, internal controls and risk management systems. Obviously, this will have to, be determined, and obviously there is notice given in terms of if it's an individual firm, or indeed if it's a themed inspection, we give information on how that's going to be approached. To assist staff of credit unions in ascertaining what qualifications are recognised by the bank for particular activities, as mentioned earlier, there is a list on the bank's website, and I know we've just spoken about that in terms of being able to have an easy link into that. So that's something we can take away. In terms of other supports made available by the bank in respect of the MCC standards and indeed the tailored fitness and probity regime which applies, we have updated the minimum competency code and requirements Q&A document, which includes a dedicated section for credit unions, which is available on the bank's website. Again, this is something we can provide a link on. And indeed, the FAQ section, can and is updated as new topics come up that are, of interest to everyone. So that's always a good resource to look at. And there will be other supporting documents in relation to fitness and probity that will be published in advance of October 2024. And with all of those, we will, credit unions will get the details, as indeed will the bodies. And I just call out again, and I mentioned, I know at the beginning, that certainly any specific queries in relation to MCC can be sent to a dedicated mailbox that we have that's called competency@centralbank.ie. So that is mailbox is monitored for those specific queries. So we really do encourage people to come along, put in your query. It may well be something that we can readily point to, there's something there already, but if it's something that hasn't been explicitly addressed, sometimes maybe it can give rise to a new Q&A.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, there's very specific examples coming in there in terms of particular instances and case studies in particular credit unions that we might get to maybe at the end, but like that, if we don't get them into the dedicated email, because it's probably very specific advices for that particular credit union. Just moving on, maybe address this to both of you, or whoever wants to take this, Joanne or Elaine. Just to summarize, what qualifications will meet the minimum competency code requirements? Just an overarching summary.
Okay,
Wants to
so
take that? Yeah.
yeah, I think I'll take that. So as mentioned, if you have the QFA, you're covered. If you have APA loans and APA savings and investments, you're covered. Or if you're working towards any of those. If you have done the credit union governance or the credit union practices, or the CUA rather than and the credit union governance, you're currently not covered. But the module regulation that you have completed as part of those qualifications will go towards your APA savings and investments or your APA loans. So you would, if you have completed regulation as part of those qualifications, you only have to do APA loans and APA savings and investment. We are looking at what we would do with the CUA and whether there's a demand, but I can't answer that yet. In terms of the Irish League of Credit Unions, our understanding is that the ACUP and pathways at level 7 will be recognised from the 1st of October. But, and that's for those who have obtained that qualification. But if you haven't obtained it, and first of all, you must also be doing CPD, obviously. But if you haven't got that qualification with the Irish League of Credit Unions, our understanding from the League is that they're not offering, I hope I'm saying this correctly, they're not currently offering a qualification that meets MCC for new entrants. So therefore, your options are APA loans, APA savings and investments, or the QFA. Is that okay?
Yeah. Then just Joanne, you'll see in the Q&A box there's very specific ones around obviously member facing, offering advice to members in terms of the crossover to board positions in terms of lending products. Have you any comment on any of
well, I think
those ones?
The message there would appear to be from Elaine that, it's for the credit union to decide on what role the board is now going to play.
Yeah.
And primarily, if you don't want your board members to be within scope of the credit union because it's too onerous, and we appreciate how difficult it is to get volunteers, then you should be removing them from anything involved in the giving of financial advice, arranging or giving financial advice. They should not be there. If they are involved in any aspect of any of that, they need MCC qualifications.
And it's really as clear as that, I suppose. There's no grey area here.
No.
So they either are or they aren't.
You're either in or you're out. And if you're out, you're back into what probably should be the role of the board, is in complete oversight rather than the operational activities. Now, I accept when you have a small credit union how practical that is, but that is the reality of the situation come the 1st of October. So hopefully there's time for people to be looking at that and what the profile of their organisation is, the governance structure, and how they can restructure it accordingly.
Yes, okay. And then I suppose, look, we're all aware of the individual accountability framework regime that's ongoing as well, with the conduct standards aligning very much to fitness and probity, the minimum competency. This just a question for Elaine. Elaine, with the upcoming updates to fitness and probity, CFs aligned with the minimum competency, how should credit unions manage the assignment of correct controlled functions and address data protection obligations, especially for those in MCC or CF roles for the first time?
Okay, thanks, Lisa, and thanks there for the earlier discussion. And Joanne outlining the different qualifications and the ones that are within, or the ones that might need a bit of update. And just on that, it would probably be useful for people who are considering what they may need to do, when they have the facts of, well, I could add this to something I have or whatever, to actually try and talk to people, colleagues in your own or indeed other credit unions that have been through it, because sometimes that's how you can kind of get good advice as to what would work for you, and also how much is involved. So I think it's always good to talk to people. In terms of the application of the F&P standards, which are linked to the fitness and probity regime, credit unions, as you know, are subject to a tailored fitness and probity regime, and the changes on foot of the decision to extend the MCC standards to core credit union activities, involving the 6 new control functions, as we have spoken about, does not involve any new pre-approved control functions. So we're still talking about controlled functions. Arising from the changes that are coming, we do not envisage that really there's any additional data protection obligations for credit unions over and above, I suppose, what they're currently used to and are required to address. Credit unions, of course, should have regard to their obligations under GDPR in terms of holding information relating to CFs, to include ensuring that the information is held securely and in an appropriate manner. And notwithstanding all of this, it's always probably good and useful thing to do, maybe to have a refresh in terms of legal and regulatory requirements, and indeed, if necessary, engage with either your legal advisors, or indeed if there's anything that has been made available by the bodies at various times. And then, of course, if there are any more specific questions, we're happy to consider those. And indeed, I should say, I mentioned the mailbox competency at centralbank.ie, but also we're always very happy to take questions through CUMA, through the likes of Lisa and indeed the other bodies, because that's often a good way of, Lisa, you're there at the coal face and you're hearing things, and you can, gather up common themes, and we're certainly happy to do those through our bilateral meetings or emails or so on. So that is another avenue for dealing with things we haven't dealt with today.
I think I got there was just one other question, I suppose, in terms of the broader regulatory landscape for credit unions at play here. I suppose, are there any additional reforms or updates that we should anticipate in the near future? Any surprises coming down the line, or anything that we need to be aware of?
Okay, well, I'd like to say no surprises, but sometimes we all get something lands that maybe wasn't fully recognized, or there's a European dimension to something. But I suppose what I'd like to maybe mention today and we referred to it there earlier on, obviously the Credit Union Amendment Act 2023, and today is a very important day in that landscape in terms of commencement provisions of certain of the sections. As people probably know, the background was this review actually, or this new legislation came out of a review that was termed a policy framework review, which was led on by the Department of Finance, and covered a wide range of objectives, ranging from recognition of the role of credit unions, supporting investment and collaboration, supporting governance, improving member services and transparency of regulatory engagement. So really we'll now, that as sections commence, we'll start to see the impact of these things, and indeed the opportunities for credit unions, which will require careful implementation planning. For our part, obviously, we have to look at the Credit Union Handbook, which includes both regulations and guidance to determine any consequential amendments. And we'd certainly be engaging with the sector representative bodies and credit unions as our implementation work progresses. So I think a lot to come from this, both in the coming year and down the line. You know, there's things like referral of members to other credit unions and involvement and participating in loans. So there's obviously going to be a lot of probably practical things at an individual credit union level to put in place in terms of processes and procedures in relation to those if credit unions make a choice that is going to become part of their business model. The other thing I'd like to take the opportunity to mention briefly is the Consumer Protection Code, which, as you will be aware, at present applies to credit unions only when acting in their insurance intermediary business. Briefly, in October 2022, the bank launched a discussion paper on our review of the Consumer Protection Code and sought views at that time on particular topics and so on. We issued an engagement update in July of last year in terms of how that work had gone. And work is now ongoing in terms of drafting a consultation paper with an updated Consumer Protection Code with a target of issuing that during this probably first quarter of 2024. As things stand, the credit unions aren't within scope of what will come out next, but very much the idea is that once that revised code is finalised, consideration can then be given at the next stage to the application of the code to the core activities of credit unions to ensure, like we've spoken about here, that credit union members are afforded similar protections as other consumers of such services. But clearly there'll be engagement with yourselves, credit unions, on any proposed extension at the appropriate time. So that's a bit down the line, but just wanted to flag that.
Great, Elaine.
Lisa, I'm trying to just answer as many questions here in the chat box as I can, right? Just because they're the ones that we've answered already. So just
let's look at that. Elaine, thanks very much for your contribution. I think, look, it's been very insightful. There's a lot, I suppose, of clarity being asked for in those questions, very detailed questions coming in, which I said that, you know, we will answer and get clarity for people. I think for those listening, we hope that this morning has offered some guidance and clarity on some of your areas that you needed information on. Joanne, before we get into some of those other questions, is there anything else that you would like to add at this point? I'm just conscious of time as well.
No, I don't think so. It's just to say, if you've concerns or you've concerns about the ability of the team, like in terms of if they have special needs, or if you're concerned about that they're not getting the content of the program, or you're going to need some additional support in terms of examination timeframes, please just reach out to the education department and they'll see what can be done. So, you know, and also just to keep bearing in mind that an awful lot of the people are already on the journey. I mean, I would imagine the main concern is probably around directors, and then that question is whether or not you're going to restructure your organization so that they move solely into an oversight role, and whether that's practical or not. You know,
a lot of the questions coming in there are kind of, I suppose, to define again what working towards 2028 means, you know, in terms of what you start doing now to ready yourself in the preparedness piece for the transitional period if you need to get people up to the standard. There's obviously the question, I saw a question up there a minute ago just in terms of HR implications on staff. That's another area that possibly we may need to look at in relation to somebody's role changing because of minimum competency, the HR side of that. Joanne, just while we have you online, is there any appetite to move back towards in-person exams as opposed to online? So someone
I saw that question, the anxiety and that around it, and I appreciate that it is tricky. But like what I would say, no, there isn't an appetite at the moment because of the volumes going through. It's just not practical anymore. But also, again, you know, there's lots of supports around that in advance. We always have a significant team on hand the day of exams. They also get loads of notification and reminders about what they do, the practice going into the system so that they've done all their system checks on how to get through it, what laptop to use, what not to use, what's allowable, what's not allowed, you know. But again, you know, you could possibly, if they had the equipment and the credit union was set up, have an exam where it's in the office of the credit union, but they'd all have to have access to the system. It would still be online, and I don't know whether that would alleviate some of the stress of special sitting. But again, you wouldn't be doing that for 2 or 3 people because it's just not practical. We don't have the resources for that. But if there was large numbers, or a credit union had the scope to have all the PCs and the equipment that they needed to do the exam online, we'd be happy to go out and sit there and just help them out if they need it, you know.
Yeah, and just you mentioned earlier in terms of your assessing and reviewing whether additional reforms of the CUA will be required. Have you a timeline on that, or is that very
No, I
much
think
a
that's
work in
something
progress?
because people had kind of kept very quiet about that request, to be honest with you. So that's something now we're going to take back, and we'll have to look at it pretty quickly, you know, take it back if we felt there was a need, and look at the numbers that have undertaken it and that, and see, can we get something, you know, there'd have to be some sort of bridge on that program or additional content that the member would cover off. You'd have to update the content, and you'd also have to then make sure that those retrospectively do have the knowledge that they need. So there'd be a bit of work in it. You know, so just leave with us. Don't have a time frame, but we certainly know in the next couple of months. You know what I mean? That can be before the 1st of October.
Yeah, and then just a very practical question here. New hires that join a credit union after the 1st of October 2024 this year that do not have the minimum competency but will begin studies immediately. Is this sufficient? Which it is,
Yeah.
if they're working
Yeah.
towards it. Also, after the 1st of October 2028, will all new hires need to have MCC prior to accepting a role in 2028?
I think what it'll be, correct me if I'm wrong, Elaine, is that it'll probably be similar to the scope of the of the MCC at the moment, and that is that new entrants have a certain period of time to get it from the time they come in. Generally speaking, you know, if you're coming into a new life company, for example, you have a period of time to get it, but you have to be supervised during that period. There's oversight. I'd imagine, and I don't want to be speaking out of turn, that it'll probably be a similar arrangement, that they're not going to expect all new entrants to have MCC requirements, and that they'd be allowed to work towards it within a certain time frame.
Thanks, John. That
Mm.
makes sense in terms of practicality, and that's the way it applies in other scenarios. But certainly, what I can also take away to confirm that is the case. But what, as you've articulated, it does make practical sense.
It's one more question. There's a lot of them around the savings and investments in terms of the credit committee coming in. And it's just, I suppose, there's a lot of them repetitive. Is it correct to say that someone sitting on credit committee or credit control committee only requires the APA loans and not the savings and investment side?
Well, you'd be better placed, Lisa, to say like what they'd be actually doing on that. I mean, if they're doing stuff with term deposits, they need the savings and investments, if that would ever come up for discussion. But if they're purely dealing in loans, it's APA loans.
Yeah, that's correct. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep
Would credit
up
committee ever deal with term deposits? I'm just not familiar with what would happen. No. Okay. So for credit committee, it's APA loans if that's all you deal with. And just, I see another question, is the minimum requirement APA or QFA? QFA is the gold standard. APA will suffice. APA loans, if you're only doing loans, APA loans and savings and investments if you're doing term deposits.
Okay.
There's one there is the Diploma in Credit Union Studies, a recognised qualification from UCC. It's on the list. It has the Diploma in Credit Union Operations, UCC, but no, it'll only be the ones that are listed on the MCC document that will be compliant. So anything that's not on that document does not currently meet minimum competency requirements from the 1st of October.
Yeah. Okay, look, I think we're there in terms of this repetition starting to come in questions. Look, we have there's a lot of questions to get back to. I suppose to build into that document, the Q&A document. From my own point of view, I'd like to say thanks to Joanne and Eva and all the guys in the LIA team for the preparation for today's event, and also to Elaine for her contribution. Really enjoyed the panel discussion, and I suppose the overall objective was to bring clarity to people around their requirements going forward. And we again, as Elaine said, if anyone has any direct questions, feed them into ourselves and we can relay them, or whatever you wish to do.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And again, just on behalf of LIA, I would like to thank the huge numbers that showed up this morning. I know we didn't get to all of your questions, but we will do. I hope it's clear now in terms of the qualifications. Again, if it's not, just reach out to education@lia.ie and they'll support you. If there's any challenges in getting people over the line, we'll help you with that. If there's special accommodations, we'll help you with that. So really, we want to work with you as your education partner to get you over the line with these qualifications as efficiently as we can. Panic not, many of you have got them. And also you have 4 years. The aim is to be working towards it, to be working towards a structure that works best for your credit union, and decision needs to be made about what role the board will play in that. And that's the big decision for you, whether they're within scope or they're outside scope. So we will leave it there, but it just remains with me to thank you. Okay, Lisa, do you want?
Just one more thing, just to clarify for people, the recording will be shared post webinar. There's just a few questions in there, so just for you to look back on, it will be made available.
Yeah. So what we will do is we'll make available the recording, and we'll have a questions and answer document that will circulate to everyone. We'll also include the link to the qualifications that do comply, and let there be no miss or like grey area on this. If it's not on the list, it doesn't apply. So you need to be working towards the qualifications that are listed, if that's okay. And just then to thank Lisa so much for facilitating that, and Elaine, thank you so much. The baptism of fire that you didn't know what you were going to face into, but we really appreciate your time, particularly on such a busy day for you, and the best of luck to you both now later on this afternoon in government. Thank you, ladies.
Yes, thanks so much, Joanne, and thanks, Lisa. And I think it was a very enjoyable experience, and indeed, I've learned some things from it as well, which is
great. So you'll be back, Elaine. Great, that's wonderful.
So thanks very much, all, and thanks to all participants.
Thanks, everybody.